Hello and welcome to Esperanzas, las vivas de esperanza. Hoy tenemos la pregunta, what were the ramifications of the Puritan Revolution? So Puritans, guys, Thanksgiving, pilgrims, that's what you usually think of, right? And that gets me to my thesis. I have a train of thought today, Eli, so it's not going to be a funnel cake day, it's going to be a focus day. Anyway, so my thesis, getting to the thesis, we often think of the Puritans as coming to America to escape Europe and flee from persecution, but this is a false narrative. And the Puritans were not these pacifist, persecuted people. They weren't that. They were actually revolutionaries, and we have to think of them in that frame of mind to be able to understand just how much of an impact and all the ramifications they had on society and that we live in today. So the three ramifications they had, they were religious ramifications, there was cultural ramifications, and there were political ramifications. So first, we have the religious impacts and ramifications of the Puritans. What exactly was the Puritan Revolution? So let's dive into that when we're talking about religious impact. So the Puritan Revolution sought to purify the church. Puritan, kind of makes sense, you know. They sought to purify the church from all these traditions and wanted to strip the church of all their traditions and all this frou-frou stuff and wanted to just bring back the bare necessities. And they also wanted to reestablish the form of government as seen in Rome. So they wanted to kind of go back to the roots, you know, roots of the church, even farther than Luther had. So yeah, and the religious impact they had was this lasting bitterness between different branches of the Reformed English-speaking church. That's the impact they had. So, I was saying earlier that the Puritans wanted to go back to this Republican model of government. And where did they get this? They got this from this Calvin guy in Geneva, John Calvin, who, John Calvin's from Geneva, and in Geneva they had this Republican form of government that was really the model political system for the Puritans. And the Puritans were Armenians. Armenians are basically Calvinists, we can say, kind of, but that's the religious background and theology of the Puritans in terms of their roots are in the Calvinist church, and there's Calvin here in Geneva, and then he has this son-in-law, I think it's his son-in-law, some relative-ish, who's, I think it's Robert Armenian, maybe I'm completely wrong, but it's some guy who's related to Calvin, who's a strong Calvinist, believes in the theology, and then he goes off to another city, kind of gets some different ideas, a little different than Calvin, but he still believes in the idea of predestination, and still very Calvinist theology. So in order to understand the Puritans' theology, let's look at this cute little acronym we have, TULIP. So TULIP is the Calvinist theology. T stands for total depravity of man. U is for unconditional election. L is for limited atonement. I is for irresistible and prevenient grace. And P is for perseverance of the saints. So yeah, that's some Calvin theology. So though the Puritan movement was rooted in Calvin theology, a lot of the focus was not on the on the theology, but a lot more on the Eucharist and on the church decor and clothing and all that. I don't know what I'm doing with that voice. I'm sorry. Very sorry. It's not an accent at all. Just anyway, yeah, they focus more on like tradition. Well, here they're trying to get away from traditions. Right back. Okay, on topic. I'm sorry. Sorry, Eli. I'm sorry. Anyway, yeah, so that was the religious impact they had. And then we also now can look at the really interesting stuff, I think. The cultural impact the Puritans had. There was a new perspective on the relationship of church and state. They thought of work as a vocation, and they believed that education was central. So let's talk about this new church and state perspective. This really was fascinating to hear about. So before the Reformation, there was the Catholic Church, which was over most of Europe at this point. Actually, I think all of it. And the church provided a lot of protection in medieval Europe, right? Because under the church you had hospitals to care for you when you were sick. You had place for your mothers and fathers to go when they got old and you couldn't care for them. You had like all these protections under the Catholic Church that after the Reformation, all these people leave the church, you know? And it's like, how are they getting all these protections since they're not in the church anymore? So Christians have to figure out kind of how to do that, you know, how to live in a more diverse religious culture, because before that it had been majority of Catholic, and so yeah, this really gives a new perspective on the church and state relationship that people have, and limited this idea of like separation becomes apparent, because no longer is the church also governing the state. They're separate now, right? So that really gives this new perspective, and a lot of things change, and there's a lot of ramifications of the Puritan Revolution. Random things like insurance need to be had. You know, you need someone to like take care of your parents if you die, or take care of your kids if they're parents. You need that, you know, and so none of that would have happened if there wasn't this separation of church and state. And also the Puritans give a new introspective philosophy that permeates American society as we know it today. Everybody knows Americans are very individualistic, right? And we see this happening because of the Calvinist theology and the Puritan theology, which really creates this introspective culture. So in the Calvin theology, with the core belief of predestination, Puritans believed that attention to Scripture should be given And you had to do this through self-discipline and hard work. And this would make you live a godly life, you know? And Max Weber attributes the individualistic American society, that's a mouthful, individualistic American society of today to the Puritan introspection and introspective. Can't think of it. Anyway, yeah, because Calvin and Max Weber says, quote, Calvinist believers were psychologically isolated. Their distance from God could only be precariously bridged, and their inner tensions only partially relieved, but instituting purposeful labor. End quote. Yeah, thank you, Max Weber. So, the core cultural values of American society today, self-reliance, privacy, and mutual respect, kind of came about from the Puritans, who believed that they weren't Roman Catholics, so they didn't think you needed popes or priests to intercede for you to get to God. They believed that you could talk to God and you didn't need a bridge between you and God. And this made them more self-focused, and they really developed very personal values and character values. So yeah, and also what's really interesting is Puritans thought of their work as a vocation, which is extremely interesting, because we have the work as a vocation really changes people's work ethic, and yeah, that's very interesting. So, education, another cultural impact that the Puritans had, they really believed in the core tenet? I don't even know what I'm saying anymore. These aren't even words. They really believed that education was necessary. You needed a biblical foundation, biblical education. So they had a lot of schools. I think it was with like a town of 50 people, you had to have at least one elementary school, and 100 or more, it had to be a grammar school as well to teach Latin to the young boys. So education was super important. They founded the first college in America, Harvard University, moved to the Puritans. And yeah, they established education and really believed in liberal arts, which is very interesting because they believed that all truth was God's truth. So they tried to look for truth in everything, and they wanted to learn about everything from a biblical worldview, not just learn about the Bible. So yeah, that's the cultural impacts they left. And then lastly, the political impact. The Puritans had a very distinct political vision. They, as I said in the first point, they wanted to go back to a republican form of government, and they attempted to model the government after the scripture. And yeah, in the Puritan political realm, politics really seeped into all aspects of life, including education and even small parts of life. When they came to America, small aspects of life like sports and religious holidays were also regulated by the government, which is really interesting. But yeah, we have a quote here from Donna Campbell, who says, "The concern of the church is the spiritual realm, the life of the inner man. The concern of the state is the temporal realm, the regulation of external conduct." Calvin also believed that the state should secure distributed justice doing best to eliminate gross inequalities in the material status of its premise. So yeah, there was this political view that they had, I think. And Alan Simpson also speaks of Puritans effect on government, saying that they believe that no one group of people or one single person should run the government, and this gives the idea of limited government. And the American Revolution was founded on a lot of the ideals of the Puritans in the English Civil War, which is really interesting, because this is how we got here today, the American Revolution. And so American revolutionaries such as Samuel Adams saw the struggle as Puritans, saw the struggle of the revolution, as the Puritans against the papacy. And Samuel says, or Mr. Adams says, quote, more is to be dreaded from the growth of popery in America that from stamp acts or any other acts destructive of civil rights. So basically, Samuel Adams is comparing the struggle between papacy and Puritans to that of the Revolution in America. So yeah, those are the impacts and ramifications of the Puritan Revolution on society. First, there was the religious impacts, really changed theology, and second was the cultural impacts, and third, finally, was the political impacts. I am trying to rush through this so it is not too long. I'm sorry. I'm really getting better at focusing, but I'm not going to make excuses,